Welcome in, folks, to the eGuide YouTube channel. So happy to have you. My name is Clayton, Director of Operations for eGuide, and I've got Gregory here as well, and Andy with Digital Creative. We're here to talk about the recent Squarespace update, which is very exciting for us because we build Squarespace and Wix websites for our clients every single day. So this update is extremely helpful for us to get our job done. And if you build websites like us, we hope that this video will be helpful. We're just going to talk a little bit about some of the updates that have occurred for the 7.1 editor and some of the things we love and some of the things maybe we're not such big fans of at the moment. Let's dive right into it. 7.0 to 7.1. What just happened to the editor?
Well, and you bring up a great starting point, Clayton, in that 7.0 versus 7.1 versus what just happened in 7.1 are basically three different things. So if we flash back 2 years ago or so, 7.0 was the only editor that was utilized. And that whole infrastructure was based on different themes that had different functionality. So if I wanted a float-in menu bar that appeared on every page, I could choose a theme within Squarespace to build my website from that theme. The CSS code that went into making that happen was very attached to the theme that you are choosing. The shift then that happened from 7.0 into 7.1 is Squarespace said, we can build a lot of this functionality in and give it to everyone, and they can customize their site based on different functionality that they would like to include. However, it's all coming from one master editor. And then with that, all of these other themes that used to have peculiarities about them kind of went away, and all of the code became universal. So any sort of custom CSS code for a 7.1 site is universal, no matter which site you're working on, which is great for us, especially when we're making customizations kind of behind the scenes to further tweak the site. We don't have to go look or create a code that's specific to a theme. But then Squarespace said, hey, look at the competitive landscape that's out there. We have platforms like Showit, we have platforms like Wix, we have some page builders like Elementor and WP Bakery on the WordPress side that is making everything really WYSIWYG. What do we mean by WYSIWYG? What you see is what you get. Editors, right? So you can basically drag and drop any object anywhere on the page. As we've discovered on Wix multiple times, just because you can doesn't mean you should, right? And this opens up the purview of designing your site however you best think it should look, but not following best design practices. So what Squarespace has done is really kind of towed the line a bit of adding some more complexity to their WYSIWYG editor within the 7.1 editor. Andy, did I miss anything?
The biggest thing that I kind of took away from it was I was on the launch meeting, which is really cool to be a part of because all Circle members were allowed to be a part of the launch, that they gave you a tutorial. And it was really cool to be able to almost watch it together in a way, because they allowed you to have the icons that pop up like thumbs up, love, all of that. So you got to see what people really were loving about the new editor. Really, to me, it was, well, let's take away all the coding, like you said, which is great because the biggest thing is the drag and drop, because having to use Squarespace, the spacers really could be a pain if you had something in your head and I need the spacer here and I need the spacer here, but it's not equal, and it just took way too much tooling around, at least that I've found. So they really were able to give you a Wix type of experience with the drag and drop. And it does have its positive and negatives, like we'll talk about. But just the ability, and it's funny that this happened because the week before I was like, man, I really wish Squarespace would have like a background on a text box and just make it, oh, here and here. And of course, they laid it out the next week after I just completed all the coding for one of the websites we were doing. So it's great. And the same thing happened with another website with, I had to go into Canva and I had a picture and then a layer background with background remover on it. And I'm like, man, I wish it was just as easy as drag and drop and piece them together. Of course, the next week now you can. So that's the biggest takeaway that I took from it. And it just makes things a little more simpler for those who are not as experienced in the Squarespace systems.
So before we get into a quick screen share, which we will do, I just want to do a quick sort of safety check for those who are used to 7.1 or even 5.0. Will folks be able to use, let's say, their websites built on old versions of Squarespace? And how about if they even prefer editing on old versions of Squarespace?
You said Squarespace 5.0, which like I don't ever want to do a site in whatever Squarespace 5.0 was. If anyone listens to podcasts, there is like the deep dive of how Squarespace came to be, which is how I built this episode, I'm pretty sure. That's worth listening to. But yes, first of all, let's talk about like how they probably could have named these versions a little bit more clear. So 7.0 is the themes editor, right? I'm choosing a theme. I don't think to date you can even choose a 7.0 site if you're a new customer. So we have legacy sites that are operating and to date being supported on 7.0. And then we have this kind of 7.1 and 7.1b that just kind of rolled out.
They're rolling it out. They're calling it Fluid Engine.
Fluid Engine.
Yes.
Fantastic. Well, happy to have Fluid Engine on board. No worries if your site's built on something older. You'll still be able to access and edit your site. But for new sites, 7.1 Fluid Engine.
I will say that the nice thing that they are working on, and in the Circle member meeting, they were saying that they are getting a lot of requests for people who are on 7.0 to upgrade to 7.1. And as we know, we've done several sites recently that you basically have to build the whole thing from scratch, and it might not really look any different. So they are keeping that in mind. And in the next year, they are going to make an automatic upgrade from 7.0 to 7.1. And they're going to put that at the top of their to-do list, which is great because as we've worked through, it takes hours and hours sometimes to do the converting. So if you were just able to, do some kind of download or upload, it's a huge boost for people on 7.0 because I know they're probably getting a little bit nervous because as someone who has an older iPhone, that after a couple of years things start not working and gets harder, and they might not support that in the next year or so.
Yeah, for right now, nothing that I know of, and Andy, correct me if I'm wrong, is being published that they are not supporting 7.0 sites. But as history would tell you, is like if we're 2 levels into the new shiny object, chances of that old functionality being supported to the level that you need your site to be is not likely. Part of the reason why we work within Squarespace and Wix is because they are applying so much development behind the scenes to keeping things up to date for our clients so that you're not in a potential WordPress scenario where you've purchased a theme and that theme is no longer supported a year after you start using it and your entire site breaks down. So even if you are a 7.0 user, I would say like they're eventually probably going to make that transition as easy as possible, with the big caveat of some of those 7.0 themes are very different in terms of CSS. So like there's no compatibility for some of those themes for it to look identical. So there will probably be some compromise that needs to be made within that transfer.
Cool. Let's jump into a screen share so we can get a visual on some of these new editing features.
Yep. So we're going to jump into eGuide site. What I did is just created a blank page. We're using 7.1 editor. And for right now, and this is probably going to change as Fluid Engine becomes more readily available, is if we're adding sections into a page, we're going to be able to add any of these sections. Anything that defaults here, and correct me if I'm wrong, Andy, is within Fluid Engine, right? And then anything that is a classic.
I was going to say, if you go down at the bottom, it says
Right
you can make the switch. Yeah.
Yep. So these classic editor sections used to be just the standard. So if you don't want the fluid engine sections for some reason, you can revert back to those initial 7.1 sections here. But if I add, let's use, everyone loves some scrolling text, right? I'm going to add this in here. And then within the editor, which is a big change from what it initially was, if I start to move any of these objects, we basically get this grid layout that is way more fine-tuned than the initial Squarespace. So just for comparison, let's add another section in here in a classic section and look at the difference between the two. First of all, we don't have the ability to out of the box in those to do the scrolling text. But here is what the classic section looks like. And if I want to move this object and I start to drag and drop that, all of the parameters of the page are pre-dictated for me from the section editor up here. So currently, if you're a 7.0 native user, if you go into editing your section and you want to make that section wider to fit more of the page, you're going to change that to a larger width. And then to Andy's point, what he was saying is that you can add in spacers to kind of bring in that content on either side. So say we want the picture to be a little bit smaller, we're adding in a spacer and we're adjusting it here versus what you just saw up here with the image is as in the fluid engine, I'm able to drag that image over by 3 spots. And because of the grid system that is applied behind it, it's sticking there, right? So that really is the biggest difference between the 7.1 engine down here and the fluid engine up here. Any additional thoughts, Andy?
I'll get to them when we do the likes and dislikes, because there's definitely some things that I have found just using it recently that it's almost more frustrating in the new version, and doing a deep dive into Reddit like I do when these new things happen, because that's when the real opinions come out. Not everybody's necessarily as happy with this update as I would have hoped, let's be honest.
I think this is a great time to dive into those, Andy. What are you hearing from the community that could be improved with the fluid engine?
So I think the biggest takeaway that I have is the grid is great, but when it comes to necessarily lining things up, it doesn't always work the best. Like you see, if for me, I was working on a client's website, I think 2 weeks ago, and I was trying to make it even with the page, and it just wasn't lining up. Whereas in the spacer world, in the classic editor, you probably could have gotten it that way, but it doesn't always work out the way that you want it to. And it's so close, but yet so far, because if it's off center, people are going to realize that. And the biggest thing I think I took away is that they really rushed this out, which is crazy to say, because the classic editor has been around for 10 years, which I couldn't believe it's been that long. But the amount of adjusting that it's going to take, like I was talking with one of our designers, Erin, that she was getting frustrated too, and that she didn't realize that you could actually shrink part of the grid to make it work the way that you want it to. So if you shrink the boxes inside of the grid, you can get it even. So there is ways of fixing the problems, not necessarily as quick and as easy as you probably would have thought, because when you say drag and drop, you literally want it to be drag and drop. So I think that's probably going to be a big update that they are going to do when this semi-beta test is done running its course.
And one thing that's clear is that Squarespace is listening to the community, right? So we'll see updates. What are some of the features that you're clicking through, Gregory?
Yep, so just showing the example of different object editors behind the scenes here, and then you do have that section editor. This functionality here of I'm going to make my grid touch cell to cell versus having a bit of a spacer between, or controlling what that spacer is between those items. Yeah, like if you're customizing an entire site with standards, this probably works really well, but because you have the ability to do this section by section, the way that you're going to want your site to lay out is multiple sections to go through all of these additional steps versus in the classic editor, If we take a look at that second example, some of these are just so prefab that I don't have as many options in controlling that content that makes it a little bit more streamlined. So great that you can have that fine tooth or fine control per section here, but it just implies that in order for it to follow some best practices, you're probably going to have to spend some more time going through each and every section to finesse it through versus using that template.
And I think one of it's kind of funny. It's a huge asset and a huge change, but also it can be considered one of the biggest negatives, depending on who you are, is that you now have the ability to edit solely on the desktop view and solely on the mobile view. You can do two different layouts that it won't completely mess things up, because a lot of our clients now are saying that, well, half of our followers are following us on mobile view. So I think clearly Squarespace is listening to that. So having the ability to edit in a different way on the mobile side to make it more mobile friendly, I think that's great. But also I've been reading a lot about how if you drop things into the desktop view, in the mobile view, it takes things in order of how you dropped it. So it's going to be a lot more customization, which again, if you want it to be custom, you're going to do that anyway. But if you're looking for more similarities between the desktop and the mobile view, it's going to be a little bit screwy, and it's going to take some time to get used to that. It's
the constant, ever-present balance of customizability and tweakability, which we love, versus ease of use. If you can make anything you want, you can also make worse websites, right?
Exactly, and that's what we run into a lot on the Wix side is, just because you can layer 5 objects on top of each other doesn't mean that it's looking good. And the Wix editor takes a similar approach in which your desktop view is completely different than your mobile view. And they've applied some enhancements that are able to take the objects that you were working with and kind of retweak them, at least to get to a better working end product. So I feel like Squarespace is probably going to do the same. Ultimately, like for some very specific designs that we're working for, this is going to work really well. My ask of Squarespace in this is to also leave those classic sections available, just in case we need a more turnkey website. Not everyone needs the ability to fine tune or finesse things as much as this Fluid Engine designer allows us to do.
Yeah. But I don't want it to seem like it's all doom and gloom, because it's easy to say, it's easy to nitpick and take apart what you don't like. But I will say, having worked in it the last couple of weeks, it's great. I mean, for me, what I like is the less customization. There's less hustle and bustle of trying to finagle this and finagle this. So it does cut a lot of corners in a very good way, that, again, the novice user is going to be able to use it. And I feel a lot more comfortable turning over to many of our clients that are not necessarily well versed in it, that it's going to be a lot easier for them to just do the drag and drop and do this here and there. And one thing I didn't mention before, but one of my favorite changes that they made is that you were actually able to highlight multiple blocks and move it at once, which was my biggest complaint about Squarespace before, is that you just had to move everything one by one. But the ability to highlight 3 different things and move it in the way that you want it, ooh, chef's kiss on that for me.
Well, folks, we've had a great time checking in about this Squarespace update. I want to thank Gregory, owner of eGuide Tech Allies, and Andy, manager of Digital Creative, for hanging out with me. If you are building your own website on the new Squarespace editor and you're having trouble, if you have any questions or confusions, please know that you can always reach out to us. We're working with this tool every day, and we make it our business to help folks just like you.
Awesome. Thank y'all.